Okay, so this is something different. This is going to be a little less scientific. At least mine is going to be a little less scientific than our normal seminar, but some good pictures and hopefully a little science too. Because we have these two things, we've kind of debated back and forth about who should go first. And I told Val that he's welcome to go first, but I'm going to stop him after 30 minutes. Or he can go second, and then I'm going to walk out after 30 minutes. Or at 4 o'clock, I should say. I'll move 5 after because we're starting. So he's nervous. But I know Val, and that's why I've been saying this, because that's one of the prime rules is to try to stick to your time, which now puts a lot of pressure on you too. Okay, so we'll try it, but I think this should be a lot of fun, and then at the end we want to vote about who had the better time, Val or me. I think the one thing that happened is we both had wonderful times. And I want to particularly thank the people from the Hassler for coming by. It's really nice, and I hope it happens more often. And you should know and tell your colleagues you're always welcome here. Seminars or anything else, computers if you need to use, a place to sit. And even folks who work on the Oceanic Explorer too, but you're very good here already. And for those of you who are exactly, I was just going to say, for those of you who are federal employees, we don't see you. We know you're not visible. Okay, so I guess I don't have my little changer. So I'll actually have to try to do it this way. Okay, so mine is a discussion of mapping from a sailboat, and Val and I were kind of almost antipodal in many ways, east-west and north-south. Not quite north-south, but my adventure was mapping on a 51-foot sailboat made for the ice off northern Greenland. I'm going to try to give you the background, why we were there, what we did, and what happened at the end. And so this story starts with a fellow named, that's a subtitle of it. This is, no Healy cruises here, so this was my way to stay sane, because if I don't get a chance to go to sea, I'm not going to.
Well, wait, go back to that picture, because I want to know why you were isolated up on the map.
Well, you'll see why in a minute.
Oh, okay.
Because, yeah, that was my punishment for many bad things, mostly including singing, which you may get to hear. Okay, so this story starts in the late 1800s in Sweden with a fellow named Adolf Erik Nordskog. I can't say the name. Anybody here speak Swedish or Norwegian or Danish? Tell us how to really pronounce it. But he was a mineralogist by training, a geologist by training, but also an explorer. And Sweden was very, very well known for its explorers, and particularly its Arctic explorers. And one of the things he had theorized that could be done is that you could get through the northeast passes, not the northwest passes, but the northeast passage, which is along the Russian-Siberian coast to the Pacific. Nobody had ever done that before. He thought it could be done. He got himself a vessel called the Vega, and here you see the picture. And I want you to note the scale of that vessel for the people. It's not a very large vessel, 43 meters maximum. I think that's out to the bowsprit, so it's not a very large vessel. 8.5 meters wide, 357 gross tons, made of oak redwood with this greenheart. You guys know greenheart. It's some very, very strong wood for ice strengthening, and you can see just barely here a steam engine, auxiliary steam engine. And he set out to make it through the Northeast Passage. As I said, Sweden had lots of different Arctic expeditions, but this was the most ambitious one. And somewhere here is his track, but I'll show you that a little more pronounced here. And this is what he did. And in one season, they left from Stockholm, and came all the way around and made it all the way literally to here in one season. And then got stuck, but it wasn't a race. He just wanted to show it to be done. And as soon as the ice opened up, they overwintered over there. As soon as the ice opened up, within a few days, they were actually in the Bering Straits. And then came around, stopping at a bunch of places. But came back to Stockholm to the most amazing celebration that Sweden had ever had, that he was an absolute national hero. They just went on celebrating the days. The crew was lauded everywhere. This was an amazing event in Sweden, a great national hero, to the point that when I was traveling to this trip, and you'll see why I could find this vessel, basically, I was in the Copenhagen airport and was getting on an SAS flight, actually to Iceland at that point. You'll see why. It's very complicated. With tons of luggage, obviously, because I was taking equipment with me. And the little girl, the SAS girl, was actually Swedish, and she asked, why am I going to all these strange places in Greenland? And I said, well, we're going to search for this Vega vessel. She had learned all about it in school, and of course I didn't have to pay any overweight luggage and upgraded to first class. You know, no, it really is a huge thing in Sweden. I'm just trying to make that point. Okay. After he was done, and he kept on many years with all kinds of interesting exploration. I should say he also was a great scientist and one of the first explorers who really insisted on doing science during the explorations, not just exploring for the sake of exploring. Each of his missions had all kinds of scientific objectives, and the journals collected from his Vega expedition are still used as references for Arctic flora and fauna and things like that. 9 volumes of them. But after he was done, the vessel was sold several times. In 1903, it was sold to a Scottish whaling firm, and on its first voyage off northern Greenland in Melville Bay, it got sucking ice, and eventually it's kind of obscure what actually happened. Oftentimes when they got stuck out, they try to use explosives to blast their way out of the ice pack. And it's not really clear, and the descriptions are vague enough that you can't really tell. It sounds like they blew stuff up. Nobody got hurt. Blew up the vessel. But the vessel, we do know the vessel sunk very quickly somewhere in Melville Bay. And there was a position for, and that's the question, but it wasn't sure. In retrospect, we learned that it wasn't clear whether the position we had was for the position where it first got stuck or the position for where it sunk. And there were several days between that. So the ice drifts quite a bit. So there's some uncertainty about where it was. And it's a position in 1903, too. I'll also tell you there was some uncertainty about which meridian they used. So right about that time, they switched from Greenwich, Paris to Greenwich. And it turned out they didn't quite know that either when asked the question. Okay, so that's the story. This vessel sunk. Tremendous event in Swedish history, not the sinking, but the passage of the vessel through the Northeast Passage. I'm going to jump 100 years later, and the modern Swedish explorer, a fellow named Ola Skinarmo, who was the first Swede to walk alone to the South Pole, the first Swede to walk alone to the North Pole, skied across Greenland by himself, kayaked around Svalbard, on and on, multiple trips up Mount Everest. He's a professional explorer. He makes his living, a very, very good living. I did put my logo here, but you'll see me walking around with a jacket with all these funny logos on it. Because what he does is he gets sponsors to sponsor him to do this very nicely. And he's very, very well known in Sweden and very successful at these adventures. And so in 2009, he decided to recreate Norskjöld's voyage around the Northeast Passage in a 51-foot sailboat that was, he didn't have it built, but it was built as a research vessel, and it's ice reinforced, steel vessel. And he did it quite successfully. He wrote books, movies. Again, in Sweden, everybody knows about this. We don't know much about it here. But he recreated the voyage in the season. And I mean, he's also, you'll see, no slouch. I mean, he does all the hard work himself, too. He's a very nice fellow. So he did that, and then last year had the idea of now going and finding the Vega in Melville Bay. And, you know, what he does is with the Vega Greenland expedition, 2015, he lines up all these sponsors. They pay a lot of money to cover all the costs. Actually, that sailboat was bought by the sponsors for his first trip. He didn't pay for the sailboat either. And then in return, they get publicity. That's the way it works. It's a different way of doing expeditions, and in this case, a different way of doing science, too. So he needed to find something, though. He doesn't know anything about seafloor mapping, and so who did he go to? But, oh, wait, I think, yeah, no, that's one of the slides. See, that's what happens when you don't. See, Val probably he memorizes it. I talk about this once. I don't. I just kind of guess to see what happens. And usually, if I have my own clicker, I can turn them before they get there. So what he typically does is he gets his kind of band of married men and women who are really, literally a band of super Vikings. And when I heard who was going on this trip, we talked about being intimidated. Not only Skinarmo, who does all this amazing stuff, but one person was a Swedish national cross-country ski champion, another person the Swedish national adventure racing champion. These are all these professional explorers and adventurers and things like that. Every one of them had been up and down Mount Everest a few times. So this is the crowd that he gathers together. But when he needed scientific input, and particularly in mapping, who did he go to? Not me. He went to Sweden's #1 super Viking ocean mapper, and that's our own Martin Jacobsson, who is now a full professor at the University of Stockholm. Not only a full professor, but a royal professor. A very prestigious professorship. For those of you who don't know, Martin was a student of ours and a postdoc, and he's quite an amazing character. He is a super Viking too. But actually, in terms of some of their accomplishments, even those guys intimidated him, which is rare. And so Martin said, yeah, sure, he'd love to take part, but Martin's also a really good scientist. And he said, we have to have a scientific mission too, and Martin and I started conspiring about what can we do scientifically up there. I've been working with a group on a proposal for a little further up, northern in Greenland, a place called Petermann Glacier. And Greenland is an amazing area of scientific focus because that's where the land ice is really trapped. And when we talk about rises or increases, probably a better word, all you, again, I was warned the non-native English speakers, don't listen to me about how you talk English. When we talk about sea level rising, it's really the melting of the Greenland ice cap and the Antarctic ice cap, not sea ice, not the Arctic ice. That doesn't change sea level, but it's those ice caps that change sea level because the ice that's in the water already has displaced that water already. And what we've been seeing over the recent time is an amazing acceleration in the rate of the melt of the Greenland ice cap. Red lines indicating areas where there is 75 or more days of melt. See from 1979 to 2007, just this huge increase. That ice sheet is melting tremendously. And a lot of that is focused on what's called the Jakobshavn Glacier and an ice stream that comes out of a place called Ilulissat. And then let's see, lots of words I can't pronounce. It's going to come up. This ice fjord, and this is basically a huge iceberg factory. The largest production of icebergs anywhere in the world is here, and it's going through all kinds of rapid changes with increased production of icebergs. Just to give an idea of what this looks like. That's the ice edge there of the Greenland ice sheet. That has receded tremendously in the last few years. I'll show you that recession in a minute. But as it recedes, it produces more and more into global climate change. But what's the mechanism? Because it's not accounted for at all in the climate models, and they've got to account for that in sea level models. Okay, so we go there. This is just to show you from 1851 to 2006 how the glacier has, the ice front has receded a little. So the town is somewhere right around here. So the ice front is really much further inland now. But despite that, because it's producing so much ice breakage, you sit in a Ilulissat, and that's what it looks like. These are icebergs. That's not the ice sheet itself, but these are huge icebergs that are just constantly being poured out of there. It's really an amazing factory of icebergs. Okay, lots of theories about why this is happening. And as I tell the class all the time, when people say it's this or this or this, that's probably bullshit. It's probably all of the above. Higher meltwater production, lubricating under the ice, again tied into warming. Sudden loss of buttressing of ice tongues and shelves, that you have features that were blocking the ice sheets, and now you're destroying those, letting them flow out. Response to air and sea variability, that's a top out one. But this is the intriguing one. Inflow of warmer subsurface ocean water towards glacier grounding lines. And this is quite intriguing because there's actually evidence for this happening. And I'll show you a picture of that. In the late 90s, there was a change in the Aegean current coming around the southern Greenland. And the records of those changes in current will tie directly into this rapid recession of the glacier. And so the theory is that warm water coming in up here makes its way into the fjords, and that accelerates the melting of the ice. And if that's true, then we have all kinds of things, again, that can get put into the climate models and the iceberg models. And so this is what we wanted to test, because all we had was a mapping tool. Are there passages? For that to happen, there has to be a passage. There has to be a way for the water to get from the outer shelf up into the fjord. So there needs to be a deep passage for the water. And so we had a scientific question, so we could justify our going. So what we did is collect all the available bathymetry, which is very, very little. We talked to all our contacts in the Danish Hydrographic Service, and we have a lot of them. Very little data that they have there. Some oil exploration. These are a lot of seismic lines that went out there, but not so much for the position. That was the position we did for the Vega. And I went to NGA, and we got some. They were actually very helpful, but you can see in the close-up. 500 meters of water. There had been a whole team of people who had spent their life studying the history of this vessel, who actually own it. These are people from University of Gothenburg. They had written all these papers to try to get money for sponsors to go find it, saying that the vessel should be sitting on a relatively flat seafloor, that it's below the depth. It's a wooden vessel, not all those icebergs, but it's below the depth of any iceberg keel, so it should be whole. And so they were trying to make the case that it would be easy to find sitting upright whole on the bottom. And gave us this position. I think at the end of the day, they probably never really gave us no position. So they really wanted to find. But that's all we had in terms of starting information. We really didn't know how deep it was. What systems to use? Well, Martin owns his own 2040. Well, that's not going to work in 500 meters of water. Maybe it would. Certainly not going to resolve a 35-meter hull, even if it's not easily. So we said, well, we'll use the 2040 to do a kind of a general mapping of the area. If we see some targets, we'll identify them. But then we'll come in with something much closer to the bottom with a real high-res sonar, with something like a Mesotech high-resolution sonar. And the idea was to use the Gavia. We were going to use our Gavia, but Val went away with it on the story he'll tell you next. So we had to find another one. So we went to the University of Iceland and got their Gavia. They also put a geoswath on there. That wasn't, we didn't think it would, I didn't think it would be much help. It really wasn't much help. But they let us, the Gavia company let us an extra battery, which was really important. So the starting place is a place called, I don't know, I think they call it, I keep saying Upernavik, they call it Upernavik. The English-speaking people there, but I don't know what the local people call it. And so that was the starting town, the closest place you can get to by plane. You can see they built the sides of Greenland, almost vertical. They built an airstrip up there. So you have airstrip up there. We're actually just coming in at that point. This was some yacht. They would not tell us we met all the crew. They wouldn't tell us who owned it. Except that he insists every day, all these satellite antennas, that he gets the London Times printed for him every day, and sits reads it punch in, cover to cover. And never looks outside. They were going through the Northwest Passage, not the Northeast Passage. But I have to check to see if they did.
Jump ship.
Yeah. Okay, so getting to Melville Bay, the vessel, which is called the Explorer of Sweden, left from Stockholm, made it on the way. It took a couple of weeks. They had a good time. It was a little more difficult for me. I left from Boston, had to fly to Frankfurt to Copenhagen, Copenhagen to Reykjavik, Reykjavik to Nuuk, Greenland, Nuuk to Kangerlussuaq, Kangerlussuaq to Ilulissat, Ilulissat to Upernavik. 2 days. It was really quite the adventure, and coming back was exactly the same, just reversing the route. These airports, in the small ones, except for Kangerlussuaq, which is the only place that actually has a large runway for more than just a Dash 8. And actually they have 737s landing there, and the U.S. Air Force and Coast Guard fly out of there. It's just one of the few flat spots in Greenland that's not covered by ice. So these airports are really not much bigger. The rooms not much bigger than this room, but they have these amazing sealskin, all the seats are sealskin covered. I don't think that would happen much here. Martin had shipped his 2040, which is really an amazing piece of kit because it's all together as one unit. With the pole, he has a mount like the same sort of mount on his own little launch, and so he just had a reproduction mount made to fit the sailboat. And you can see the 2040 transmit receiver here, and I think, well, here you can see the CPAP, using CPAP, MRU, MRU 5, and temperature sensor, and all the antenna, the 3 antenna, he never has to make an offset measurement. It's all pre-measured. Everything is fixed. It's phenomenal. I was flying out there all the time saying, how are we going to find the center of rotation? How are we going to find, I'm wondering, how are we going to do this on a totally unknown vessel? It doesn't matter. All the offsets are fixed. They're all set. Sound speed measurement right on there. And you have it twisted, it doesn't matter because it's relative to itself. It's really a cool way to go. And I had a fight with them to insist that, you see the setup there. And again, the 3 antennas all fixed too. Nothing had to be moved. That's all that came right off from one vessel onto the other vessel. I fought with him. I said, I'm not going to do a survey without a patch test. He said, we don't need to do a patch test. I said, I'm getting off then. We did a patch test. Didn't have to do a patch test. Okay, so you see what it looks like there. It's really quite cool. There's the vessel. The my mother saw one of these pictures on the web, and she said, "Which blue Smurf are you?" It's the logo wear. Just to give you an idea, it's not a luxurious vessel at all. It's really made for work. The cockpit noise is ubiquitous. This was a fancy dinner sitting down, which we occasionally did in port here this time, but you see that's the kind of main table. The 2040, in case you wonder what it looked like, the details of it. A very neat GPS I had seen called the Hemisphere, which came with Army Star and Marine Star corrections, really quite neat. And Martin had a little Valport sound speed and a little tiny fishing winch. And this is what we're going to do to take a sound speed profile. It worked just fine. And the water column, we didn't even have to take sound speed profiles also. Once you made one, it never really varied much, which is surprising to me with all the icebergs in there. I think it had a lot of fresh water in it. Okay. I'm going to get my outro just to where we worked down below. That was it. That was the workstation. You'll see the flow here. Coming in with Kara 6 and 6, processing the multi-beam data, mouse, parallel processing in the cubing on both of them. We gridded way below, finer than we should have because we're trying to find the tiny target. Didn't care about the gridding artifacts. Didn't want to miss something. So 3 to 5 meters, equal global mapper and 3 mouse for looking at it. Again, it wasn't terribly good. The data was spectacular. And this is amazing to just throw a system on a sailboat. First line, that's what it looks like. System worked right to the spec, 500 meters. This blue is 500 meters down. It was just spectacular, and it was quite easy to put together a beautiful story. But you see the topography, that's zero vertical exaggeration. I have the scene in a minute I can fly it through. But you'll see when we look at the land what some of this geology really looked like. Nothing like what they said, and these places beyond extinction, these are the deep channels, and they're large. That was the key. But scientifically, very successful. I'll tell you the bottom line, we didn't find the wreck. But there are wonderful deep channels that go right into the fjord. So there are those passages. So that's kind of what it looks like. But and again, artifact-free, it was just spectacular to have a system like that. And that whole view was changed. Things now. Unless you have to scale this up, the big systems that are just set up like that. Really quite about it. I looked at this and I said, holy mackerel, I've been there before. And this was during a search for the Swiss air crash. The exact same geology. This is off Halifax. That's off Greenland, but of course, as Jim knows, those were connected at once. So we're seeing the same metasediment, same structure with this glacial imprint that's kind of gone over it all. It's really quite interesting. Okay, what we did is then with the multi-beam and the backscatter, try to identify targets. Really impossible to see what the geology looks like. Well, we identified about 90 of them or so. You got to realize that this is ridiculous. That's 200 meters. Let's see. So it's 600, 700 meters swath there. That's way too big. And we're looking for something that's about that big on there, but it had a boat shape. So there were a few that we had a little more faith in. There's one there. Actually, this one actually we're pretty excited about. But look at all the rocks. You can see the house. We're really convinced yourself to see something there. So we had those. When we had something interesting, we looked at the water column to see, did we see mass and things. Never anything very convincing. The idea was to do that for a week and then come back a week later, or the second week, and bring in the Gambia and prosecute those targets. But in the middle, at the end of the first week of mapping, all of a sudden we divert off and we head to this amazing place. I can't pronounce the town. That's the whole town. We're about 150 people. No airport there. 2 vessels, 3 vessels arrive a year. That's it. But it's something called the Finger. You see that means the devil's stomach. It's just 1,800, and all these super Vikings, they all love it. It's a place it's a mecca for professional climbers. Just spectacular coming in there early in the morning, just to give you an idea what some of this looks like. Really beautiful. Vessel ties up. Now, this is the most interesting thing. I had to wear all this logo here. So we're getting off, and I don't know why they're filling up my backpack. They give me all this stuff. I have no idea what we're doing. I'm really worried about. I can't climb up a mountain with these guys. But I'm getting out in my jeans. And Ula says, he says, is Levi's a sponsor of this trip? I said, no. And then he goes to the cross-country ski champion, and he's also the editor of Outside Magazine for Sweden. This guy, he says, take off your pants. the underwear that he was wearing, this Klima beautiful, smart little underwear, that was the sponsor. It makes this guy wear underwear, and I get the hot flugs, whatever, pants to put on. So nobody would be wearing anything that wasn't logo wear. So then we start our little trek into the town. That's the town, moving up the hill a little. Dogs everywhere. I mean, this place lived with their dogs, by their dogs, everywhere. Moving up, view of the vessel. And then this is why it was so hard to find things. That's the terrain that this is exactly the terrain we're surveying in. Absolutely. And Martin was saying he'd never been on a field trip, in essence. That's not why we went there. They went there to see the mountain. They gave him such a feel for what we just surveyed. That was actually quite right. But this is exactly what we were surveying. We try to find a 40-meter wreck in that. Crazy. So again, moving up, stopping every once in a while for the commercials. There's a professional photographer along and videographer, and that's how they pay for the expedition. So, you know, the backpack sponsor, the shirt, everything he's wearing is by the sponsors. And moving up, there's the devil's thumb. That's the underwear guy. Better than me. I could give you a panorama there. I should say these are mostly Martin's pictures, not mine. I don't have that skill to take such nice pictures. Martin there, and there we got it. So it was about at least 1,000-foot climb. It's just in about an hour and a half. These guys were running, and I'm dying, but they were very nice. They were wonderful. They never made fun of me. What you can see, I made it. What you see though behind now, this is the ocean. So again, this little town is another one of these sources of icebergs. And then coming down with some spectacular views of the icebergs too. And then all of a sudden, now I understand why we're unpacking. We set up tents. I said, we're spending the night here. No. They hadn't gotten pictures from the tent manufacturer. That's hard to do on a sailboat. So we had to stop. And then the frozen, the dry food manufacturer. It's just a different way to work. And then down. And it was interesting. We got to the weekly, I think, during the summer town market. So the 100 or so people all gather and just kind of trade goods on this little platform, kind of interestingly. And then back off, because now we were going back to Upernavik to pick up the Gavia. And great icebergs coming along, just to give you an idea of passing, icebergs everywhere. So really quite spectacular. Look at that blue ice line through there. And what I hadn't known is that while they were trading in there, they traded for some food. And so we had narwhal, that's narwhal. We had walrus, we had muskox, and polar bear. And of them, only the muskox was actually any good. Okay, back to Upernavik to pick up the Gavia people, which has an amazing, unbelievably well-stocked modern supermarket. And even that other little town had that too. So once or twice a year, these vessels come. This one has an airport, so they can get stuff all the time. But even the one up north, that I couldn't pronounce, by the Devil's Thumb, had a smaller version of this kind of store. Really amazing, not like our Arctic. So you really don't see that too much. Gavia, now we'll talk more about Gavias. So we have the number one, I guess, the University of Iceland one, with 2 Icelanders now joining us. We kicked off a couple other people. And launch, first ballasted. Launch and recovery was just off the side of the sailboat using one of the winches. And when the weather was calm, it was very simple. You see some days beautifully calm. Not a bad place. And we had days like this, once it was doing mission, we had 16 missions. It aborted itself every once in a while, but look at that topography. They really were skilled kind of planning missions up and down that topography, these literally vertical walls. And when they had time like this, of course, they're doing Swedish Outdoor Magazine, or Outside Magazine, is doing an article on Martin, and it's going to be called Professor Cool. So there he is in front of the iceberg. And Ola, there was no luxury on there. Remember where that little winch was? That was the toilet for the ship. No showers or anything. If you wanted a shower, that's what you did. And then every once in a while, a nice meal. And this was at the end. Ola had a little tree thrust. And I thought it was just quite amazing. Even the weather's nice. Some butter. basically the entire thing about it. He was making what we would call bananas foster. So it was butter with a bag of sugar, a bottle of rum. They put some chili pepper in it, and then some Swedish berry in it. You know, it was just remarkable. Just keep going and going and going. So we occasionally ate nicely. That was very nice. And then recovery of the gavia. Some days things were not so nice. Lots of days also. The weather was a lot rougher. You see people looking not too happy. I was down there working. I was actually on sailboats. I had no problem. But I was one of the few who didn't have a problem. These people have heard so much more time than I have, but they just keep going back. And you'll see in the typical Swedish tradition, and it's like singing. They can sing all the time. And so he's singing about Martin, and she's saying, "Shut up." Martin Jakobsen is and I'm saying, "What's going on here?" It interrupted my processing. Hi, goodbye. That's Gothenburg slang. Okay, and the gavia had a rough time. It was vertical cliffs. Obviously, we had some samples taken in that nose cone, but it came back. Processed the gavia with sonar whiz. Martin looked at the geoswath with hips and sips, got not very far doing that. And then basically, the gavia, though, with the mesotech, this is 600 kilotech mesotech. Now we have a 50-meter swath here, or scale there. If that vessel had been upright and whole, we definitely would have seen it with this, even major pieces of it. So wherever we surveyed, and the problem is, and this is where we surveyed with the gavia, prosecuting some of those targets, focusing on the area that is supposedly sunk at, we didn't see any indication of it at all. And the bottom line is, this is why. This is down to the typical vertical exaggeration, 6 times, not much. That's the scale of the vessel. Okay, I have a scene here of the entire survey. If anybody's interested, and you can get an idea of what that like. Again, that's the normal 6-time vertical exaggeration you normally look at. See, most of these walls are vertical, just like you saw walking around. And okay, that's it. So a beautiful Arctic sunset, and I had fun. Okay, so that's 30 minutes. That's right, which is a really serious thing, because sonar is just
okay.
interesting forward.
I apologize. Okay, so now we go from the Arctic to the Aegean. This was an equally fun trip, I contend.
Well, we'll go.
With lots of also interesting characters along the way, and places and scenes that are out of the ordinary, at least for me. So without further ado, let me first start with the team. This is off the, so this trip was sponsored by the Ocean Exploration Trust, which is, you might know as the people who fund the Nautilus, and directed by Bob Ballard. Our chief scientist was Mike Brennan, who's a nautical archaeologist. Dan Davis is also a nautical archaeologist who is with us. And the AV team leader, our partner in crime, my partner in crime, Art Trembanis at the University of Delaware. So that's how I got roped into this, was as his chief engineer. When Larry says our gavia, Art, he really means your gavia, but you know how we like to share. And I should also point out Tufan Turulani. He was our project manager, and there is no bigger character in Bodrum, Turkey, than Tufan. And you could pretty much get into anywhere in Bodrum if you had a T-shirt with Tufan's face on it, I'm convinced. He was fantastic. And the stories I could tell about him are legendary and go on, and I'll tell a few as we go on. And I'm just going to say thanks to all of these people, partially because I'm stolen their pictures for this presentation, but also for all of their hard work and everything that went on, and for the chance to go. I'll start with my acknowledgments. So here we are in the Mediterranean. Here's Turkey there, and Greece, and Italy, and Bodrum is right there. And so it's in southwest Turkey. Hello. Yeah. So zoom in a little bit. There's Istanbul, just to kind of give you a sense of of where things are, Cyprus and Crete and Rhodes there. And then if we go a little bit closer, this is the Dacia Peninsula, and all of these dots were possible shipwrecks, ancient shipwrecks, that were identified by the Nautilus from previous go here. Bodrum you see at the top of the screen up there, coast, these are all part of Greece, these islands, and Turkey, the mainland, there to the right. So I pulled what bathymetry there was for this area, at least publicly available. This actually came from GeoMap app, just to get a sense. And the contours here, between the purple and the cyan, is about 350 meters. I have to say these contours are not very good at the scale that this is gridded at. But when we were literally from here to the back of the room, from the shoreline here, we would be in 60 meters or more of water. It also was very steep along the shoreline, a little less so out here. Our mapping was a little more successful, maybe with the AUV than we didn't have any mission aborts at least. But I want to give you a sense of Bodrum. So this is the city center of Bodrum in the harbor, the ancient city of Bodrum. It wasn't always called Bodrum. You might know it from another name, Halicarnassus. And it's famous for lots of reasons. Herodotus, the father of history, was born and lived in Halicarnassus, but is probably more famous for housing one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, which was the mausoleum at Halicarnassus. So in about 350 BC, Mausoleus was the king of this area, and he expanded it greatly, and his wife, who was also his sister, but that was common back then, after he died, searched all of antiquity for the greatest artisans, and they built the most monumental tomb for his burial. And with tons of beautiful sculptures all around, and this has been described, it doesn't exist anymore, but it's been described in places all over the Mediterranean, in literature in various places. Portions of it do exist, actually. At the top was a 4-horse-drawn chariot, giant horses, so they're actually in the British Museum now to get a sense of the scale of those things. Drawing a chariot with Mausoleus and his wife in it. This thing lasted for 17 centuries, and in the 1300s, the 14th century AD, a series of earthquakes toppled it. And shortly thereafter, so 1300 AD, that's kind of the Middle Ages, right? The Crusades were going on, and much of the stonework from Halicarnassus now exists in the Bodrum Castle. The Bodrum Castle is the castle, it has a long name. I wrote it down someplace, but I don't know which slide it's in. It's something like Peter the Liberator, Hospitaller, Knights of St. John. It was a crusading castle. It was the Crusaders who went and fought for Jerusalem, who escorted pilgrims along the way, who provided a place for pilgrims who had become sick and were dying at times in places like this. It was quite the citadel and changed hands many times along the way. And I point all of this out. So here, this is the Bodrum Castle there, very prominently on the peninsula. Halicarnassus, the remains are here. Our ship was moored when we were in port, about where that red dot is. This is an old amphitheater. The Institute of Nautical Archaeology, which I'm going to introduce you to, is up there. But I point all of this out because it has pertinence to what we're going to do later. When we talk about Bodrum, modern Bodrum, if you've ever been to Miami Beach, I suspect that it's very similar. At night, it is crazy. All night long, there's laser light shows and discos and bars and restaurants and throngs of people of every make and model and size and shape you can imagine. I'm sure. I'm sure. And I'm sure we just added to the harbor. This is the castle in the background. What's hard to make out there is that they're advertising for the discos and the bars with laser light show on the side of the castle down below. To try to give you a sense of what the place is like, we have a little video. So this is probably 11:30, 12 o'clock at night. Like it just never stops. But it was really fun.
We did that on our sailboat too.
So it does actually stop eventually. It happens, I know, at about 4 o'clock in the morning, because at about 4:30, so it was hot there, right? It was like 33 C or something like that during the day. It was really warm, 90 degrees plus, and so everybody slept out on the decks of the sailboat. And most of the time you were trying to sleep, and you could hear all the thump, thump, thump going on from all of the bars in the few nights that we were in port. But then it would eventually quiet down, and if you're not from a Muslim country, and I'm certainly not, this was really cool. Oh, go back. Really cool and a bit eerie. Hopefully it'll be loud enough that you can hear. It's the Imam calling everyone to prayer. Apologize if that's not louder. I think he was tired, actually. But so you would hear that during the early evening, because it's 5 times a day, right? But this was the only one that you could really kind of make out what was going on. Okay. So the Institute of Nautical Archaeology, in about 1960, a guy by the name of George Bass, who's considered the father of underwater archaeology, created this museum. He was a professor at Texas A&M, and he and a guy by the name of Kamal Tulak founded this. He was one of the first archaeologists to really invest in underwater studies of underwater shipwrecks, finding that so many of the artifacts were really well preserved underwater and down, buried under the sediments. And so what his work really revolutionized archaeology. It tells us they've informed a lot of our modern theories of commerce and ancient civilization throughout the Mediterranean. And Tufan was his facilities manager for a long time at this place. And Tufan actually's house is on the campus of this facility. Inside, there's all make and model of ancient artifacts and people working to clean these artifacts and to preserve them inspect them with X-ray machines Tufan's talking about up there. There's people carefully cleaning things and getting them ready for display. If you like jigsaw puzzles, there's no end of putting stuff together. Amphora everywhere. If you need a handle, they've got plenty of handles. I thought this was funny in particular because they eat so much yogurt, and there's a yogurt bucket on the bottom, like a half-gallon one. And they have huge tanks that they put wood from ancient vessels in to preserve them. You don't want them to dry out; it would destroy it. So they put them in tanks with water and then eventually other chemicals to preserve them for display in various places. It's the largest underwater archaeology institute in the world, and the only one in Turkey. This is the library, arguably the largest nautical library in the world. Very neat place. There's a couple visiting scholars there going through things. So now we go back to the castle, and the reason we go back to the castle is that, another picture of a castle. The castle is the museum. And so they've converted the castle into a beautiful museum to house all of these underwater wrecks. And don't you hate it when somebody's head gets in the middle of your picture? So that's how I know it's the biggest underwater archaeology museum in the world and the only one in Turkey, because it was on the sign. These are things carved into the walls of the castle. Here you can sort of make out the St. John there from the Knights of St. John and their crest. And if you ever go to an underwater archaeology museum, I totally recommend you bring your own archaeologist. They eat a lot, but it's great because they're a fountain of information about all kinds of things. And we learned about how the ships were constructed, some with mortise and tennyson kind of construction, and then later with different models, and all about amphora. And we took funny photographs. Amphora come in all kinds of shapes and sizes, and you need to know how to pronounce amphora. The emphasis goes on the am at the beginning and not the phora at the end, which I, of course, always get wrong, and I probably will say it 10 times as we're here. But they come in all makes and models, and there's giant volumes you can look through, because an archaeologist, a nautical archaeologist, can look at one of these and say, from the toe and the curvature and the handles and the length of the neck, they can tell you where it was made, when it was made, who it was made by. It's like the beer cans of antiquity. And they're everywhere because they were used to ship everything all around the Mediterranean. And I always wondered why they're pointy on the bottom, because they don't sit on anything very well. But the reason is because you stack them together in the hull of a ship, in the hull of a ship, in the cargo area, and then you put multiple layers, sticking other ones in the gap between them, and really fill the hull. The later Roman ones tend to look less nice and have the coil ribbing from their construction. And the oldest ones are really the most beautiful ones. And of course, they were used to carry everything from wine and olive oil and spices and you name it. This is anchor. Bronze, I think, Roman 1st century. You know how I know that? Because it was on the sign. How am I doing on time? Do I have time? I probably don't have time. I get to go 5 minutes after. So I'm not going to read this. I wanted to read this. There was a chapel in the middle of the castle that, like, the construction of the chapel and its history really gives you a sense of all the different cultural influences that this castle has gone through over the years. That's a picture of the castle, and we can look at that later when there's more time. There's displays in there that talk about how they did the excavations for all of this. They found a ship that was totally full of broken pieces of glass that was one of the most phenomenal finds in the world. And in fact, Corning donated tons of money for people to painstakingly try to put pieces back together and to sort out all of this glass. You would be surprised the beautiful glass that could be made in ancient times. All kinds of other artifacts. This was one of the ships. I couldn't even tell you which one that was, but this was the view from the top, and this is the disco that was out. and the only thing called Harley-Canassus in Bodrum that I could tell is actually a nightclub on the far side of the harbor there, colloquially known as the Harley-Canassi. But the most famous shipwreck in this museum is from near a city called Uluburun, and so it's called the Uluburun shipwreck. And this is a model of the ship. It's the oldest known shipwreck ever found. About 1300 BC, I think it was built. And the phenomenal, so let me back up. It was found by a bunch of sponge divers. People did a lot of sponge diving in Turkey in the early 1900s from boats. And Charlie Bass and Kamal Kulak, the guys who founded that institute, were the people who excavated it. It took 10+ years to excavate over 22,000 dives. It was in 55 meters of water. They could only spend 20 minutes on the bottom each go. They would do 2 dives a day. And the captain of their ship, the Virazon, was Tufan, the guy with us. And he did a lot of the diving. And the things that they found in this wreck were absolutely phenomenal. So these giant copper ingots were found. 10 tons of those, and 1 ton of tin ingots. Anybody have a guess about what the ratio of copper to tin is in bronze? It's about 10 to 1. Anchors, all kinds of other artifacts, incense in big pots. This was a display that they had in the museum. The cool thing about this wreck, let's see, I want to make sure I get all the details here. There were like 7 civilizations represented in this wreck. It was Nubian in Africa, Mycenaean, Syrio-Palestinian. It was all over the map, and I don't have a full list, unfortunately. There were elephant tusks and hippopotamus teeth. There were figurines from Syria. There was the Holy Grail. There's all kinds of great stuff in there that totally revolutionized our thoughts of commerce. This was a wealthy ship. This was no peasant ship shipping stuff around. There was a scarab of Nefertiti, the only scarab of Nefertiti ever found. That this actually says for my talk. It's a neat place. There's a huge amount of history and archaeology there, and lots of interest in finding the wrecks that have such well-preserved stuff on the bottom that have been hidden there for a long time. So when we got there, we toured all of that stuff the first day. The next day or two, our AUV finally came in the mail, and Art spent the first day working with the students and everybody else, explaining how it all works and putting it all together. In the meantime, Carter and I put together the batteries, because you can't ship all the batteries in one go on a passenger flight in any reasonable amount of time, and so we had to totally disassemble them and ship each of the stacks of lithium-ion batteries separately, because they're dangerous goods. And we put everything in a van, and we shipped it down to the boat. This is a picture of the SDS Bodrum. SDS stands for Sailing Training Ship, and it was an absolutely gorgeous boat, 108 feet long. Beautiful cabins, beautiful work, all kinds of trophies from sailing regattas that they had participated in. The bunks were all along the outside here in the sort of main cabin area. It was absolutely gorgeous. This was early morning, the first day we were there. This was Art sleeping and everybody else out on deck, and the castle in the background. And that was the harbor on the, I was standing on the bow here when I took this picture, so I just turned around and took that picture of the harbor. The weirdest ship moored next to us. I'd never seen anything like this. This big silver ship with a bow down into the water and then up. I've never seen anything like that. It was crazy. The food was fantastic. Like, if you get to go to Turkey, go for the food. It was great. Like all kinds of wonderful stuff, that some of which I had and some of which I hadn't. This was our cook, Josef. He was fantastic. His English was great, and he was a lot of fun. And he had this great dance move on the dance floor. It was a basketball shot. I had a lot. And Mohammed was our resident geologist, who was out there the entire time working on a report for something and texting his wife latitude and longitude to keep her updated, because she had her thumb on it. This is Tufan again. I just wanted to show him one more time, because this picture is Tufan actually pulling those ingots out. That's the picture that's on the front page of the National Geographic article that was all about. So we finally set sail. This was our captain out of Bodrum, and we sailed south to our survey area. Everybody helped to put up all of the, well, not all the sails, but most of the sails. It was a lot of fun, and they'll let any idiot drive the boat, which is fun as well. I guess it's a training ship, but we had some nice wind and a little water coming through the scuppers on the sides, which was kind of fun, particularly for the high school students who were with us, who hadn't seen that kind of stuff before. When that happens, you got to hang on to your AUV, make sure you don't lose it over the side of the boat, and sometimes you have to hang on to your undergraduates, make sure you don't lose them either. The first place we stopped was a place called Knossos, the ancient ruins of Knossos, and this is the breakwater, and we actually moored right here, and we were antsy to test the AUV and get it in the water. So we ran a mission, and I had no idea where we were and hadn't looked at a map. And I just picked a direction to go that I knew wasn't towards land, to do a test mission. And we split the breakwater, the ancient breakwater, right down the middle. It was a beautiful go. So then we argued that night about what we were going to do over the next few days. We got up the next morning and had a traditional breakfast, which was most every breakfast of olives, feta cheese, and tomatoes, and crusty bread. It was great. You can tell I like the food. Art showed everybody how to do a CTD cast with the little which we're doing. I can't think of what that guy's called. We had everybody learning how to assemble the vehicle and O-rings and all of that kind of stuff. And I was teaching students how to watch the control surfaces in the back and make sure everything's working well when it all gets started up. And then we put her over the side. And like Larry's first go, we had beautiful weather, and we used the davits, and it was really nice, and far cry different from our normal run-of-the-mill choppy seas. Okay. So we pull her out and have the mission queued up and ready to go, and off she'd go, and backgammon would ensue. and I would babysit the AV and make sure that everything was working right, and Art would sweat with the Iridium phone because the AV will send us text messages via Iridium if something goes wrong. And then when it came back and was on deck, we would download the data, and we would scratch our chins and wonder what it all meant and whether or not it all worked. And the archaeologists would come over and say hi, and there'd be hugs because it did work, and we collected lots of great data, and they were all happy. And everybody would come around and look and see what's going on. And we'd get all of the students. This was a high school teacher and a high school student, and you can probably see Sonar Wiz in the background there, looking for targets. And Art and I would commence doing what we do best. And then after that, we would moor someplace close to shore. That what I learned is the traditional med moor, where you anchor the nose out and then tie the stern to two rocks on shore, and it positions the boat really well. And then swim call. And the water was crystal clear blue. It's called the Turquoise Coast. It was absolutely gorgeous. And salty. Like you could float out. I don't know how anybody drowns in the med, because you just float right on top of the water. It was a lot of fun. So these are the kinds of missions that we would run. This is the middle of a mission. You can probably see kind of the lawnmower pattern that we have set there. And in the middle, we're at 365 meters water depth and about 10 meters off the bottom. So we had sort of optimized our missions, again, to look for shipwrecks using the side scan primarily, but we also had the geoswath going. A typical mission might look like this. This is about 1 kilometer wide and 3/4 of a kilometer high. We also did some target missions like this one. We'd start in shallow water so that we could get Doppler velocity lock as quickly on the bottom as we could, so that the navigation would go well. Here you can see a close-up. There is a likely shipwreck. And this one, those were the kinds of things we were looking for. Of course, the mosaics like this don't show it as well. And here's a mission that we came back to search these a little bit more, actually. Yeah, there's another one here you can see. Here is one that had been previously found. I don't know if that dot is offset there because of a navigation error, or if that's parallax in Google Earth. I'm not sure. So we went through all of the data after a couple of days of go, and this is what a wreck would kind of typically look like on a seafloor in our lower frequency side scan. A big rubble field, maybe 10 meters long or so. In the bathymetry, it might look like this, just a couple of tens of centimeters high with a scour field around it. A little bit hard to see, but certainly doable. I just have a collection of different things. Here's probably a single amphora with a scour circle around it. Pock marks of some kind, we're not sure what that was, depressions. Some of it was geology, some of it was, there's another wreck. This was a known one. Something, don't know what that is. There's a amphora. I think this might be with the higher frequency sonar, but you can clearly make out kind of what that is. Don't know what that is. Diamond. Here's another bit of a wreck, we think. Ark of the Covenant. I don't know. There's all kinds of stuff down there. Lasso. There's a couple of more. Amphora, probably. Of course, we don't know for sure. Our camera wasn't working properly, unfortunately, but what do you think? Tire maybe on the bottom there. So it's not clear what this is. Funny depression in the bottom. There's another big wreck. That was one that was known as well. Some geology, some rocks, some funny escarpment kind of thing there. Let's see. What was the point of this mission? This slide, I forget. So these were the. So we would take a mission like this and pick out the targets, and then go back and try to do the higher frequency sonar stuff. So there's the target we were trying to hit right there. Actually, kind of unfortunately is right at Nader, which was probably poor mission planning on our part. So there's a bunch of these. I'm going to flip through these because I'm kind of out of time. There's one wreck that we saw 3 times in 3 different views. This one's not clear what that one is, but it certainly looks different from the others. No real superficial expression. Here's one with a troll mark through it. So trolling is totally prohibited in this area, largely because of the damage it does to wrecks on the seafloor from the antiquities standpoint. But lo and behold, the troll mark right through the middle. So here's a bathymetric conundrum for you. So this is geoswath data coming down a slope. And this is about at 150 meters. I'll show you a bigger view of all of this later. But at the bottom of all of this and at the top of all of this, the seafloor is totally smooth. And you can kind of see that at the top. But in this one area, it totally looks like an artifact, a sonar artifact of some kind. But in every mission that we have, for a week's worth of missions, we have this funny ridging in this one section of the seafloor. And there's a profile, and this is 5 meters, so just tiny little segments going down there. 140 meters, 150 meters, somewhere right in there. Curious. And it's curious to me that these look like they're parallel to the cross-track direction, and so do these. They don't immediately look like they should line up. It's a little curious. But I don't know, it's in every one. I looked at the density profile, the temperature, the salinity. I looked at the pitch of the vehicle. None of that stuff is odd there.
140 meters is a magic depth.
Sea level?
Less than
I'm thinking rounding error on your depths.
I don't.
I've seen this very thing in rounding errors on depths. Like rounding to the nearest meter or something like that.
I would be surprised, but I suppose it's possible. We processed it. No, I guess it's all in carats. Yeah, I don't know.
Do you have a line running parallel to the slope?
I don't, unfortunately. That's a good question, though. There's more of it.
It's definitely depth related. I mean, you can see the boundary. The boundary changes right at that. So, if it's around here, then it's happening at a certain depth.
Yeah,
Should be where it changes precision or something.
Yeah, where it changes precision.
It goes flat.
But I'm more curious about the ones that don't look perfectly parallel. It actually starts looking real.
Yeah.
Stuff to the right from the
track.
Yeah.
It's got to be.
Well, no, but it's just stuff that isn't there too.
Yeah, like particularly up there.
Yeah, that's.
And look off on the right side on this middle line.
A bunch of the little stuff depending on the angle.
Yeah. So something curious is going on there, and why, I don't know. Okay, so I'm mostly out of time, and so I'm going to flip through a couple of things real quick. This is that ancient city of Knidos, and we took a day and walked around all of this with our resident archaeologists, and they explained all kinds of neat things to us. This is a view of it from the ocean. I should back up. This was the business side of the harbor. This was the military side of the harbor, so the triumphs would be here and the cargo ships would be there, and it was an extremely important and famous port in antiquity for lots of reasons, and one of them, well, this was cool. There's a big, giant, perfect hydro target. Yeah.
We'll all have to go to the calibrate.
One of the things that made this place so famous was this elusive temple of Aphrodite, and this is a sketch of what it's thought to have been like. People came from far and wide to see this sculpture because it was one of the first sculptures that depicted a woman totally nude, and men loved it. And it was supposed to be like absolutely beautiful sculpture. And it doesn't exist anymore. It ended up in Istanbul and destroyed in a fire. But throughout later Greek ages and then the Roman ages, there were myriads of reproductions done, and a huge amount of argument about whether or not any of those are even close to what the real thing was like. But there's a pedestal there, and the lady who excavated this place was a wealthy woman for whom archaeology was kind of her hobby, but I think she was a very good archaeologist in her own right, Isabella Love, and she thought that this pedestal was the Aphrodite portico. It turns out that they would later find an inscription. She excavated this area in the 70s, and late 60s, they would later find an inscription on this portico that it was likely a temple of Athena. Now, if you know art, you know that he has many talents, but you might not know of this one. I'm sorry, that's not louder. Art's dad is an opera singer, it turns out. Oh, there's that ship, by the way. Okay, so this was the scope of our mission. So over 7 days of go. This is about 5 kilometers in that way and about 1.5 kilometers this way to try to find as many wrecks or possible wrecks as we could. We probably think we might have found 5 or so that had not previously been identified. And then after a week and a half sort of go, we sprung a leak on our AUV. And thankfully, it was a small one, but it had me in full surgery mode, looking inside, trying to figure out what, if anything, had gotten wet and where the leak might have been. And so this was a bit frantic. And we did lots of surgery to kind of look and see where the problem was. Everyone else was busily working on data, so it was kind of a good hiatus in a way. We did eventually find where we thought the leak was, and we did some testing, and the leak didn't come back initially, but then we did another deep water run, and the leak did come back, and we decided that better safe than sorry, and we would quit. And actually, this was the culprit. It's a marine sonic side scan, and the penetrators are nylon with a nylon nut. And when I opened this up, I could turn that nut with my finger. It totally wasn't tight. So water had weeped in through that guy. And here you can see the salt kind of encrusted on the leak detector strip down on the bottom. So it was a fantastic go, 2 weeks of go, and amazing place, amazing people, amazing data sets to look at, lots and lots of fun. And I'll end with a nice sunset picture as well.
Well, mine was a sunrise and a sunset at the same time.
Well.
At this point, I was going to ask for a vote about who had more fun, but I don't want to ask for a vote. I vote for Val. So if the question's for Val.
Yeah. All right.
Okay.
Oh,
If you had to do your AUV mission planning differently, have you learned anything from your mission planning in this area?
You know,
What would you do? What would you recommend?
let me back up and I'll just illustrate that real quick. Boy, here we go. So we ran missions like this, and we were 10 meters off the bottom and a swath width of our line spacing of something like 80 meters and 45 meters.
Did you say which frequency?
This was a 900 kilohertz.
And you have a 1.8?
1.8 megahertz, yeah. So we would run stuff like this, and then from this data, pick out targets to then try to go back and revisit if we had time. And when we went back, using the method that we did, we would try to center this survey right with the target right in the middle, and we were spot on every go. And in one survey that was, let's go back. In this 3-hour or so survey, every one of them was spot on. So I think what we did by starting shallow and moving deep was the way to go. Because had we started out here, we'd accumulated a lot of error on the dive to the bottom that we could maintain bottom lock with the PBL and move down there. Now, if you're in a place like Larry was, where maybe you're way offshore, or the slope here is too steep for the Gavia to track the bottom on the way down, then that gets really challenging. So I think we did a pretty good job, and it worked pretty well. So I don't know what we would have done differently. I was pretty pleased with this actually, and our ability to revisit a target and be pretty well right there.
If the camera had been working, would you have planned it differently? We would have. Well, not from a Bigfoot perspective, but we certainly, like these missions were maybe 5
meters off the bottom, maybe 6, I think, and we'd have come down close. Well, yeah. So our camera, the strobe wasn't flashing with the camera for whatever reason, with the shutter on camera. We could still get pictures just like that down to 100 meters. The water was so clear. But so we might have been able to run higher up with the camera, but normally we would fly really close to the bottom, a couple meters off the bottom for camera work. Certainly like off the coast of Delaware or whatever, we'd be right down there to Salmon. Yeah.
What's the plan for direction down around those four? Do they go back to them?
That's a great question. I think the goal in the long term would be to send ROVs down that could take their time, map everything out, both with photos and acoustically, and then try to recover artifacts and that kind of stuff to preserve them and capture them for posterity. It'd be certainly very difficult to dive here, and you couldn't do these kinds of surveys with ROV, so an AV is actually a great way to go for relatively large chunks of seafloor. Yeah?
I just have a question to both of you. This was both about doing research from sailing vessels, and it looks like it's fun to do research from sailing vessels, but do either of you see any intrinsic value to actually using sailing research vessels over powered research vessels, or any reason there'd be to do that besides sort of the novelty or the fun of it?
Yeah, the advantage, I think, in both of these cases is that these were vessels that were there and provided opportunity. And oftentimes, these exotic sailing vessels will go to places that dedicated research vessels not heading to. So that's the real rationale behind this. The only thing I would say is fuel costs. Certainly on long transits,
We had some challenges for sure. I think that it's great from the standpoint of outreach.
and well, I should say acoustically very quiet.
Yes, that's also true. Sailing and that kind of stuff. We had power issues because we wanted to stay up to the wee hours of the morning and process data, and the crew wanted to go to sleep, and the generator was right next to them, and there was a battery bank, but we were charging the AUV off the battery bank, and so so they would turn off all the power, and we would all have to go to bed, which probably was good in the long run. If the weather was bad, we'd have had a really rough time because it would have been very difficult to get the AUV below decks, and to disassemble the AUV if you need to, it's difficult to do if the weather's bad. We've had to put a tent or something like that.
And you can imagine, he was on a very large,
108 feet.
Yeah, we were on 51-foot sailboat, and so everything that happened on that one table. So all of the assembly, disassembly of the vehicle was taking place there. But that would be the case with the small powered vessels.
So there's hope actually to go on the SDS Bodrum next summer, maybe, in the Black Sea, to do similar kinds of work there.
So I had the choice to go on either of these two. Did I make the right choice?
Bad choice.
I don't know. Well, I don't see the vote. Val. Well, you think you sound good to me. But it's moving.
That's probably safe.
Okay, thank you all.
Yeah.